It's our starting pitcher episode, part 1. We'll talk strategies, undervalued players, mailbag, and much, much more. Alex Chamberlain of Fangraphs joins us next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me, as always, is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. We had a beautiful day in New York yesterday. It almost was 70 degrees in the middle of February. Was it as warm for you up in northern New York?
Yes, it was, but there's snow in the forecast tonight, another possible 3 to 6 inches, so the winter is not over.
Oh, man. Well, hopefully it'll be spring soon. Hopefully the baseball lockout will get settled. I'm not in charge of that, but hopefully they'll do it. We've got a great show tonight, and we have on, from Fangraphs, he was Baseball Writer of the Year 2018. I've played a couple leagues with him in Tout Wars. Welcome to the show, Alex Chamberlain.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
By the way, did you know, Alex, that you are actually our very, very first guest on Beat the Shift when we were over at the TGFBI podcast? Do you remember that?
I was first? I remember being pretty early, but first. Wow. Well,
Number
okay,
one.
cool.
You were the number first
Nice.
guest. We
Bring it
couldn't
full
think
circle
of any.
then.
Yes, we couldn't think of anybody better to bring on as our first. And thank you for coming back on the show.
And it's been all uphill from there, I'm sure.
There you go. So we're going to talk pitchers. Pitchers obviously can't be covered in one episode, so a little bit of a split episode. This is part 1, and we'll start with a little bit of strategy here. And first of all, if anybody hasn't seen it yet, Alex has created a pretty nifty pitching tool. Do you want to explain what that is and how people can go on there, see it, what it's all about, and use it and all that?
Yeah. Well, it's on. I host it on Tableau because it's a dynamic tool, and I don't know how to do like website coding or anything like that. And Tableau is just an easy way for me to visualize stuff. But the tool itself is a pitch comparison tool, and basically what it does is it takes like the myriad specs from a pitch. You know, the velocity, the spin rate, the release point, the movement. Excuse me. I was like looking for. What other important things there are, and other elements of a pitch too, and it takes all that stuff and it calculates basically compared to all other pitches which pitches are the most similar according to those specs, and using that information you can rank or just like resort the list of pitches from closest to farthest, and then with that information it'll show you for each pitch how that pitch performed. So you can take, I think it defaults right now to Corbin Burns' cutter. You can look at the comps, the pitch comparisons for Corbin Burns' cutter, and see that the pitches that are closest to it are spectacular. And so you can kind of use it. The way I like to use it is for pitchers who have small samples, and I have a hard time evaluating pitchers in small samples because you'll see a couple starts. Again, by nature, it's a small sample, so it's volatile. And it's kind of hard to weed out the noise and kind of hone in on a signal. So I will go to my pitch comps tool and pull up a pitcher like Shane Baz, who only threw, I think, like 11 innings last year. And I'll go and compare his fastball to other pitches, and I'll compare his slider or whatever else he throws. And I'll see that his fastball is a lot like Garrett Cole's, and it's a lot like Jacob deGrom's, and I can take that information and kind of have kind of an actionable idea about what to do with that small sample. You know, I think a projection system can do a lot with results even in a small sample, but to know, like the fastball performed well, and it's valid that it performed well by comparing it to pitches that are very similar to that, and those pitches also performed well. It's just kind of like a way to externally validate things that I'm seeing with my eyes, and also things that are occurring in small samples. I'm finding it very helpful to evaluate pitchers who have kind of popped up, or rookies who we don't have a lot of Major League Baseball data for, to kind of help me get a better sense of how I feel about this pitcher without kind of just throwing up my hands and saying, well, it's a small sample, I can't do anything with that.
Right. Is this major league experience only that's on the tool? Like it's Boz in the small sample size?
Yes, yeah. So it just uses the specs from Statcast, and Statcast is only major league.
Right.
It's only in the major league ballparks. Well, I guess technically it's in some single A parks now, but primarily I'm only using MLB data. So once someone debuts, I can finally like look at their specs on their pitches. I can run it through that tool, and I can get a sense for like who how good are these pitches by comparing it to pitches that are similar to it.
Right. How do you compare a similar pitch? Like how do you pop up that all of a sudden Shane Boz, the comp is DeGrom and Cole? Like how does that actually work?
Currently the calculation uses Euclidean distance, which is neither here nor there for someone who doesn't really care for the math. But it's basically just taking a bunch of different variables or a bunch of different elements of a pitch. So again, like the velocity, but it's taking all of that, and it is like kind of like it's like the Pythagorean theorem is the distance between two of the corners of a triangle, right? The long side of the triangle. It's basically like Pythagorean theorem, but like for way more points, and kind of like in a much larger multi-dimensional space, trying to find which pitches are closest mathematically. Like if pitches, Boz has a pretty good velocity and certain kind of like movement characteristics and release point characteristics, and it's going to look at all the pitches that are closest in that sense. So like if he has a high, and I'm not talking about Boz specifically now, but if someone has like a high arm slot or a low arm slot plus lower velocity plus an above average movement profile, it's going to find pitches that are similar to that through mathematics. Basically.
And how can we use this tool to find undervalued fantasy pitchers? Because that's what everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to get into the pitcher before there are big things. How can we use it for this?
Yeah, so a lot of times like I will look at a pitcher. I will go to a pitcher first and look at his comps. So I will go to like someone like Shane Boz, and I'll run through all of his different pitches in the pitch comps tool and be like, okay, this is how his fastball looks compared to other pitches. This is how his changeup looks. But you could also do kind of like a reverse engineering approach, which is like, okay, let's go comp Jacob deGrom's fastball and see which pitchers are closest according to that. Or let's go comp like Shane Bieber's knuckle curve and see which pitches are closest to that. And so you could take some of the game's best and most elite pitches, like a Emmanuel Clace Class A, not splitter, but cutter, or power sinker, and run it through the tool and say, okay, these are pitches that are most similar to that pitch, and kind of get a better idea of, you could probably find a pop-up guys that way by looking at the best pitches and seeing which random names show up, kind of in elite company that way.
Right. Yeah, we had Brian Bannister on the show earlier in the week, and that's what he does. He looks and sees what the great pitchers in baseball do and tries to, add that kind of mechanic with his pitchers. I mean, that's really what you want to do. So, if you see Shane Boz looks great, right now ATC values him as a $13 player in 5x5 Roto. How does that affect your score? Are you bumping up his strikeouts? Are you bumping down his ERA? Like what would you do procedurally to say, okay, I like Shane Boz and I've got better information? How would that actually, how would you use that in practice to affect the price you'd pay for him?
Yeah. So Shane Boz specifically, I'd have to look at his projections. I'm actually somewhat surprised that they're as bullish as they are, because he had a long run of high walk rates, and he finally cleaned up his mechanics just by virtue of pitching only from the stretch, which is pretty incredible that he had such a cleanup. I think he's always ran high strikeout rates in the minors, and so his ERAs. I'm looking at his ratios right now in Fangraphs. They're pretty good for a projection system. So I think there's I think that the projection systems are doing a good job of being as bullish as I am. I think there's maybe a volume concern there, but he also has a volume concern. So I think if you looked at him on a per inning basis, he would probably look like one of the 15 best pitchers, starting pitchers, in baseball. Of course, with only 124 innings per ATC, he's not going to quite make it that high. But I think he's like the 36th pitcher off the board or something. I mean, that's kind of like a nice juncture where you can start pivoting from quantity to quality. Guys who are going to give you very high quality innings at that juncture. In a draft, you can start replacing them, with some of the depth that you draft later or off the waiver wire, and not really have a significant opportunity cost. If he gets shut down early or if he runs into some injury trouble. So, but with other guys, I might look at. I think a lot of projection systems might be very outcome oriented, so there might be an opportunity to kind of like arbitrage there, where you see, this projection system is still kind of factoring in that Camilo Doval did not tweak his mechanics, in August. Tristan McKenzie also did not. A projection system might say Tristan McKenzie did not tweak his mechanics after he came up from his demotion early last year, and then stopped walking guys. So, there's moments where like the projection system will see, two different guys in one season and say, both of those guys are, a true part of him, whereas mechanical adjustments like that will get lost, and you can find that. By running like those numbers through the pitch comp tool. I don't have the granularity right now to be able to be like, okay, do it from this date range kind of thing. Like, what does Camilo Doval look like from August onward? But it's something I'd like to add in, and that way you can kind of get a sense for how has this pitch improved from prior to that mechanical adjustment to after. So I would say generally there's probably not too much actionable information. I do think it's really helpful for people who are struggling to develop opinions about guys who are just debuting, who don't have a lot of major league data. It's kind of helpful to get a sense for like what their arsenal or their repertoire really looks like.
Great stuff, and obviously for established people, I think the projections do a great job. But of course, in the people with not that much experience, that's a blind spot of projections. So that's a great asset that you have here. And, speaking of volume, you mentioned you're not sure of the volume. One thing that I've seen in fantasy baseball over the past couple years is the volume question of the pitchers who pitch the most innings, they're worth the most, right? And we used to have tons of pitchers who would meet the 200-inning threshold for the year. We don't really have that many this year. Question to you is, who are the pitchers this year that you think are going to make the most? I mean, last year, Zach Wheeler led all of baseball with 213 innings, Walker Buehler 207. Two others had more than 200, which was Wainwright and Alcantara. Look at that, Wainwright over 200. But who do you think are the best bets to make over 200 innings for the year?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick someone, it'd be Wheeler. Like, if I had to just place my money on one horse. I think... maybe someone like Garrett Cole has been mostly healthy for his career. Kyle Hendricks has been mostly healthy, although he wasn't working efficiently last year and got hit around. He usually comes close. He's usually like 180, 190. So maybe not 200 for him. Someone like Luis Castillo is always putting up volume. But I try not to think too much about it, because I've drafted pitchers before on the premise of them being healthy or guaranteeing me volume and having them get injured. So it's a little bit of a fool's errand. I mean, truly the pitcher who is most likely to give you the most innings is the one who's been the healthiest and the most likely to give you innings in the past. And at the same time, if you had some kind of like, I think it's a survivor model or a hazard model, I can't remember, but a hazard model might tell you that the guy who has been the healthiest longest is also probably the one who is most due for
mileage,
due for
right?
an injury. Yeah, right.
Mileage on the arm.
Due, right. In air quotes, most due for an injury. So it's really hard to play that game where you're like, well, he's been the healthiest, but also like he has the most mileage on his arm, so he could get injured by virtue of being so healthy previously. So it's really hard for me to like reconcile that. So
Yeah.
I try not to lean too much into innings. I do think if I was gonna like make a decision in a deeper league, I would think about Zach Wheeler up front because I think he might give me 190 innings, almost no doubt. But I don't want to guarantee that to myself, or give myself a false sense of security because there truly is none.
Sure. And for fantasy, it's important because it's not only important whether you pitch a large number of innings for the year, but per start. Because if you want to get a win, the best thing you can do is stay in the game longer to give your you the chance. Like take a guy like what's his name on Seattle, Marco Gonzalez. He has earned like one of the most number of decisions over the past 3 years, and that's because he gives depth. He pitches 7 innings a game, so it is important to do it. Ruvain, what are your thoughts? We drafted in Raslam our first starter, Zach Wheeler, on the premise that hey, he's going to pitch the longest, he's going to get some of those decisions, and in a points league, those wins and innings are worth quite a lot, and we were very happy to take him in the 3rd round. What about you? What are your thoughts on the 200 inning pitchers for this year?
For this year, I don't think anyone's going to get it, especially if the season starts late. So I don't think that's going to be
True.
attainable. I think maybe it's going to be like a 180 plus type pitcher. And there are a couple names. I mean, you mentioned Wheeler, you mentioned Cole already, but two guys who also are little. They're mid range. One is a mid range guy, and one is a guy off of a lot of people's radar. Lance Lynn. Lance Lynn is a compiler. He's thrown 200 innings 3 times in his career. He's 34. I'm not saying he can't do it again, but he just goes out there and he just keeps trucking and trucking and trucking. Another guy who always throws a lot of innings, and it's surprising because of what team he plays for, but that's Herman Marquez. Surprisingly enough, he throws so many innings. Last year, he threw 180 innings. He's thrown 196 before. He's thrown 174. So even though that ERA is not the prettiest, he will give you a lot of innings. So if you want innings eaters, you want try to get some quality start. I don't know how many quality starts you're going to get out of him. Not that many, but he's a guy. He's a compiler, and if you're that's what you're looking for, that's great. But last year there were only 4 pitchers that did it. In 2019, 15 pitchers did it, and in 2018, 13 pitchers did it. So there's a trend that it is going down. It may be because of a combination of the middle relievers coming in. It could be a combination of the broken season of 2020 not having a full season. This year may not even having a full season. We don't even know yet. So there are a lot of things that play into it. But there are pitchers who have in their contract incentives to go 200 innings. Whether or not the managers will let it, whether or not the organizations will let it, that's a whole different issue.
I'll throw in Jose Barrios, pitches for Toronto. Toronto currently does not have a great bullpen. Maybe they'll change that with some free agent signings once we resume. But Jose Barrios, he was finished 3rd last year. It's another interesting option to do that. Let's go to draft strategy, and we're probably going to ask that of our next guest as well because everyone has their own strategy. But let's start really generally, Alex. And when you come into let's talk roto. Obviously, it's going to be different for different formats. If we're talking head to head that you and I had played in before, we're talking about pitcher volume, innings, very important. But for roto, what we usually talk about here, what is your very general starting pitcher strategy of what you want to do, and maybe talk both in an auction and versus the snake draft?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the strategy will apply generally and to starting pitchers, but I actually usually, I'll look at ADP for a snake, but also for an auction because you can kind of get a sense of the salary for a pitcher based on his ADP. Those should be pretty strongly related, but I'll go to ADP and I'll start from the bottom. And I'll work my way backwards, and I want to get a sense of which pitchers I like where at certain junctures in the draft. And I don't really want to make this about the validity of ADP. My kind of like my fundamental idea about ADP is they're price tags, and if you walk into a store with $260 to spend on food and you're ignoring price tags, then you're not going to get the best deals. It doesn't matter what you think about the prices, whether they're good or fair or whatever. If you walk into a grocery store with $260, and you're ignoring price tags, you're not going to get the best bang for your buck. So I'm looking at ADP and I'm trying to get a sense of which especially for pitchers, which pitchers I like later in the draft. And I want to have an idea of how many there are available. I want an idea of where they're showing up during the draft. And of course, all of this is kind of relative to what I think their earnings power is going to be. So like if, I'm looking at guys who I like, but obviously I want them to be affordably priced too, so I can try to generate the strongest ROI. So I'm creating kind of, I'm not even a mental list, but an Excel list. I have a draft tool that I've created for myself, and I watch all of those guys, and I make sure that I have an eye on which rounds they're going in, or what dollar value they're going for. And as I get closer to the top of my draft, then I have a better idea of, okay, which aces or kind of like 1A or even tier 2 pitchers would I be comfortable taking and not really force the issue. But which ones would I be most comfortable taking? How comfortable am I missing some of my targets and being able to supplement with some of the guys later in the draft, knowing where they're going to be coming, and really kind of threading that needle and not screwing that up because I'm aware and cognizant of when they're going to pop up in the draft. So I always start from the back, and I draft backwards is what Brian Slack called it once from Baseball HQ. It's drafting backwards, and I do that with pitchers, and I do that with all my players.
Yeah, all good advice. I think I'd add to that it's also important on the pockets. I guess it's hot spots where you have not just one or two, but 3 or 4 pitchers that you like in a certain spot of the draft. Because let's say it's the 15th round and you say, you know what, there's like 4 pitchers that I like that is on average going there. You can be assured that at least one of them will appear there, right? If somebody really likes one of those pitchers, pitcher A, let's say A, B, C, D, it's possible that somebody in your league really likes A. Maybe somebody really likes D and they'll jump them up 2 rounds. But to have all 4 of them where the ADP is going to be, if the ADP is 15th round, that means on average they're going to fall there. You might get the 17th round, right? But the probability of having one at the 15th round is very high the more pitchers you have. So I would not just look for a pitcher I like. I would look for rounds where I have a few pitchers that I think I can take within a round or 2. Ruben, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to add on a little bit what Alex said about the 1A. When we draft, when we draft, we're never really looking at a one starter because especially in auction, when it comes to a snake draft, you take whatever the value is and you go according to the ADP. But you always look for we always look for a 1A, meaning you don't need the top guy because in an auction they're going to be overpriced. They're not going to get that return on investment that you really want. But when it comes to a 1A pitcher, basically the pitching market is coming back to you. You don't have to overpay for something. You can pay value or a couple of dollars over the value, and that way you can get 2 1As for the price of a 1, and that way you get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, auction very different with the pitching for me. In auction, I might be devising a plan based on how ADP is to how market AAV in an auction, I should say, is to my values. It might look like two $20 pitchers, which you really can't do 2 $20 pitchers in a draft because you only get 1 pick per round. Now I wouldn't say that I go by ADP. ADP for me in a draft is used as a guide for where I think pitchers will go, but I don't look at it. When I draft the first 4 rounds, I don't look at all at ADP. I take what I think is the best possible player that can help me with the construction of my roster going forward. The only place where I'll use ADP in drafts later on is to say, all right, I'm in the 8th round. Do I think I can get away with not picking this guy and letting a few picks come before me? How close is his ADP to what I think? And if ADP is much lower, you know what? I can chance it, and I can pick this other person first and then that. Yeah, use it as a tool to see if I can wait. But I never want to use ADP as a guide. And certainly at the end of draft, the last couple of rounds, you can throw ADP out the window. Just draft whoever the heck you want. Anything to add, Alex?
Yeah, no, I mean that's right. I mean, you're not using ADP to determine. It shouldn't be used as a ranking by any means, but yes, it's less important at the beginning, right? Because you're just going by talent. In the middle rounds, it's interesting, but it's very helpful because you do have a sense of kind of like it's probabilistic, right? You can have a sense of
game theory.
It's game theory. You have an idea of if I can draft him now 100%, or I can wait to the next round, have 14 more picks go by. will he still be there? It's probably a coin flip now. So like you have a better sense of like, should I be popping a guy early? Should I just be pivoting to a different position? You can make a lot more decisions that way. And again, like you said, when you get to the later rounds, I mean, the dollar value equivalent, and I always relate ADP back to dollar value equivalents. Once you get to like
For sure.
the 17th, 18th, 19th rounds, you're talking about the difference between like a $4 player and a $3.70 player. And the round after that's like a $3.30 player. So like, if you're thinking about it in dollar terms, if you're willing to spend another 30 cents or 50 cents in an auction, go the extra round. Reach for the next guy. You're not going to be an idiot, or it's not going to be embarrassing if you pop ADP early and reach above ADP. If you really like a guy, because at a certain point at the end of the draft, you're talking about the difference between 30 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents, or at the very, very end, literal pennies difference between certain guys and certain rounds.
Yeah.
So 100% I'm on board with that. I do think my auction strategy is also different in that I am never, right, I'm not trying to get an SP1, SP2, SP3, SP4, SP5, SP6. I'm a kind of guy who will get, right, I'll get 3 SP1As, an SP3, 2 SP6s who I think will be SP3s. My strategy is so different for auction, but a lot of people don't play auction. But I'm constantly looking at, you have to be tracking the prices that other pitchers are going at. So you need to be vigilant in an auction, knowing who's going at what price. Kind of having a sense of, there are guys in this kind of tier, he'll probably go for a very similar price. So I'm always calibrating that. If Luis Castillo is a $15 player, Frankie Montas is probably going to be a $15 pitcher too. So I'm always doing that arithmetic in my head, and I'm never locking myself. I'm locking myself even less into certain pitchers, and I'm very more flexible, because if the price is right, I think dollar values in auctions are even more volatile than ADP. I think auctions are just a totally different dynamic. I don't know if you guys have the same experience.
Sure. Absolutely. Everything, you can be in two of the same format and in two different rooms and have totally two different outcomes. That's what I had last year in labor. Prices were not that bad, and I jumped in, and we got some really good higher value players in Tout Wars last year. Oh my goodness, it was way overpriced. I just waited the room out, and 17, 16, 15, and just did that. So that is true. Talking about starting pitchers, I had an article a couple years ago that I thought was true for a long time. It was called "The Case for an Ace," where I showed that, historically speaking, taking one of the top starters, we're talking, let's say, a top 10 starter, had a better return on investment for the longest time. And I think that has been true even in the past couple years. Question is, do you think that's going to be true this year? And I ask that because I see a lot of more risk in the starting pitchers than usual. So I have the ATC inter-projectional standard deviation metric, and listen to these values of the pitchers in the first 4 rounds. Cole at 4.8, that's already a good one. And by the way, the average for players is closer to like high 3s. So Cole is a little bit on the higher risky side. Burns 5.2, Bueller 6, Scherzer 4. So Scherzer is like a low risk pitcher, if you will. Woodruff 3.6, sounds like a not risky. DeGrom 6.4, Bieber 6.8. I mean, these are very much, the riskiness of pitchers seems like it's much higher this year than usual. And it really begs the question, will this hold true? This might be the year that you're better off in drafts not picking an ace and grabbing a 4th round pitcher and a 6th round pitcher instead, and getting that hitting up instead. What are your thoughts on that this year, Alex?
That's exactly what I've been doing. So I agree. And I think in addition to the riskiness, there's also the added element of I think pitching is running deeper than ever before. I mean, I in the past, I think Paul Sporer calls this
the glob.
What is it? The glob. I call it the minefield, and it's like right around SP 20 to 25 through SP 40. You have these pitchers who probably had a good year the previous year. People are excited about them. Maybe they don't have a long track record, and they're the kinds of guys, like year in and year out, that middle chunk of pitchers just bomb. They bomb, and this year they're really strong. And maybe my biases are affecting me, and maybe they're going to be bad too this year. But just running so much deeper, we're seeing guys like Alec Manoa, Shane McClanahan, Shane Boz, Charlie Morton, guys who are like, who have strong pedigrees as minor leaguers and now as major leaguers, or guys with long track records. Even Lance Lynn, like dropping down to like SP25. I mean, Yu Darvish at SP30, probably a very high risk guy, but also a very talented pitcher. I mean, I think we're just seeing it's running a lot deeper than usual. Luis Garcia on Houston, maybe like SP50. I mean, that's a guy that I'm pretty excited about just from a repertoire perspective. I don't think he's like the next budding ace or anything, but he has a really strong arsenal of pitches, and I think I'm just seeing a lot more depth this year, and it's much more encouraging to me to not force the issue up front. I might grab one of those first 4 or 3 round aces if he falls, or if I find myself liking if I'm liking the price basically. I might pull the trigger, but I'm really not trying to force the issue, and I really am just taking the best player. And I feel like a lot of the best players up front right now are the hitters, at least from a risk perspective and just from a total value perspective.
Sure. Ruvain, do you agree with the strategy this year?
I completely agree. This is not the year to go Cole with your first pick, which people were doing last year, or DeGrom with your first pick like people were doing last year or the year before. I think that there's so much risk, and you rattled off some of the names. You're not even mentioning a player like Robbie Ray. He's in the top 10 of the ADP for pitchers, and you know what? He did this for 1 year. Is he going to repeat it? It's not just the injury concerns of DeGrom and Bieber or the age of Scherzer. All these pitchers have warts, and you know what? So do the pitchers later down. And why should I spend money and possibly lose my return on investment, using that term again, lose some of that value there when you can get a hitter? So why don't you wait to the 4th or 5th round? If you wait to the 4th or 5th round, you got names like Glenn Slynn, like we mentioned before, Max Fried, Kevin Gausman, Joe Musgrove, Jose Barrios, like you mentioned before, even or Dylan Cease. All these guys are considered, they could be aces, but they're not truly aces, so I guess they'd be like the 1A, and that's what we're talking about. And you can wait the first 4 rounds and still get one of those guys, and I'll be perfectly comfortable getting one of these quote-unquote safer aces as opposed to the higher-risk pitchers higher up.
Yeah. Alex, the NL is going to, nothing's set for sure, but it seems like they're going to adopt the universal DH. Now, projections out there supposedly accounted for that change already. But, that kind of change in your projections is not always that simple because, we're talking about pitchers who've had experience at NL ballparks. There's going to be some type of inflation, I think, even if you try your best to adjust for it. There's no substitute for pure experience, right? Just look at the numbers for what happened is always better, and there's always going to be some kind of mismatch when you're trying to adjust projections for ballparks. Do you think that the projections as they are now are going to still overvalue NL pitchers? Meaning, if you had a coin flip between an AL and an NL pitcher, according to projections, you should probably choose the AL one. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's pitching performance is so volatile. I don't want to backtrack, but like part of the reason why I also am more comfortable to take later pitchers is that pitching performance is more volatile than hitting performance. It's just fewer things are in the pitcher's control. There are many things that are in the pitcher's control, but we also see time in and time out, and research shows that pitchers are in less control of a batted ball outcome. So as pitchers become more in control of their strikeouts and walks, that's great, but there's still a big what-if element for 60 to 70% of plate appearances, which is a lot of plate appearances to account for. From the DH standpoint, we're talking about maybe, before interleague play, it would have been maybe like 7% of the batter's face were pitchers, and now maybe even less than that. I can't even tell you. It's going to be less than, it's going to be single digits, and then with the introduction of consistent interleague play, it's probably even less than that. So you're talking about several points of WOBA, weighted on base average, which is how we should be measuring production, and those equate to points of ERA, but for such a small number of hitters, it really is not something that I'm going to lose sleep over. I guess if I had 2 pitchers that are identical, but in different leagues, truly identical, but one's AL and one's NL. Yeah, I will probably, I will default to, I guess, and we're talking about from a projection standpoint, I would say that maybe the AL pitcher is being undervalued, yes. But also, I just can't make that hypothetical because there's really no pitchers who are truly identical. And I haven't found myself at any point in any draft yet being like, well, am I going to pick the AL guy or the NL guy? I think maybe like from an auction standpoint where you have a little more flexibility, you could do that. But I think in a standard snake draft, you don't really have very many opportunities to have to be forced to make that decision, which I think is probably very fortunate for us. And even if you're going to, I'm someone who's not going to read too deeply into it, for better or for worse. I'm not saying that's the correct decision, but there's just so much volatility in pitching that I'm not going to let a few points of ERA deter me from someone who I might like from more than someone else who might be in a superior league.
Ruben, I'll ask you the question this way. Do you ever consider the division that a pitcher pitches in and saying, wow, I don't want to pick a pitcher in the AL East, my goodness, or look at that AL Central, that's pretty crappy. Let's put, if there's a coin flip, take the guy in a certain division. Would you consider a division in terms of whether you would pick a player or not?
Not early on. Early on in the draft, when the pitcher has the quality pitches and the quality everything, and it's a good pitcher, I'm not concerned about it. But when you go later on, go deeper into the draft, that's when you start finding these players that are playing in weaker divisions. Like you mentioned, the NL Central is not going to be that great this year. The AL Central is not going to be that great. There are a lot of easier teams, weaker teams that if you want to get a cheap quality start, you can take a pitcher that's playing the Twins, or it's going to play the Reds if on a bad day or something like that. There are teams that are weaker, and I think that we saw that when we played in 2020. 2020, they just played a lot of games in the division. You saw a lot of outliers of how pitchers pitched just in their division, and you saw the differences in the statistics that the teams who played in the NL Central, AL Central, some of them had inflated numbers and stuff like that. But when it comes to the DH, we have the sample size of 2020. Yes, it was a short sample size. Yes, people like to throw it out. But when it comes to being equal based on league, people drafted before the DH was known in 2020. I don't think it affected the values that much, so I don't think NL or AL makes really a difference. Division may, but not AL, NL.
Alex, before we go on to talk about some of the ATC undervalued pitchers, just wanted to get your thoughts as you do great work with, writing about some of these minor league prospects. Is there a minor league pitcher who hasn't made their debut yet, or maybe a sleeper pitcher pretty low on draft boards that you might think would surprise us that you would urge people to look at in draft?
Sure, yeah. A minor league pitcher would be Peyton Battenfield. He's on the Cleveland system. He's actually been traded twice in his very short career, but he is extremely high strikeout, extremely low walk rate. It's very quintessential of Cleveland to be targeting these guys right now who have big whiff rates, who have very tidy walk rates, exceptional command. These are the guys that they're really targeting in their systems right now, and maybe they're not totally polished. Maybe they're missing, a secondary pitch. Maybe these are the kinds of pitches that are working better at against AAA hitters than major league. AAA hitters, and not major league hitters, but the kind of guys who are very polished already in terms of their critical elements of pitching and trying to add a little more to that to turn them into viable starters. Peyton Battenfield, it looks extremely appetizing in that regard. In terms of a major leaguer, I'm all in on Patrick Sandoval this year. You can use the pitch comps tool. He looks like a spitting image of like a peak, not peak, but Luis Castillo. Luis Castillo before 2021, where he had a bad year. So I think
Luis Castillo.
The good Luis Castillo, right? The ground ball heavy and whiff heavy Luis Castillo. He looks great, and that's something where my pitch comps tool clued me into Pat Sandoval, because he wasn't really on my radar, and I was again ready to dismiss him kind of as like, had a nice small sample, not like overly thrilled by the peripherals or anything, but when I looked at the individual pitch comps, I'm like, wow, this is really, the sinker stands out, the changeup stands out, this is all really impressive to me, and that late in the draft, he's like SP60 or whatever. I'm willing to take I'll leapfrog ADP by 1 or 2 rounds to make sure that I'm getting Patrick Sandoval, and knowing that like I'm not missing out on a whole lot by gambling on him later in the draft like that, as opposed to again taking a certifiable gamble early on certain pitchers. So Patrick Sandoval is my guy. Targeting him a lot. If he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out. But I'm not gonna lose sleep over it because his ADP is pretty low right now, especially in 12-team leagues.
Yeah. So the questions on those two players, on Sandoval, why are projections? I mean, projections don't dislike him, but most projections have him a bit over a 4 ERA. ATC is one of the low people with a 3.92 ERA, which mimics Steamer, actually. Why are people as low? Why do you think projections aren't taking into account something that you see a breakout with these pitches? And on Peyton Battenfield, the organization is fantastic for pitching, Cleveland. I don't think he's done anything higher than Double-A. Do you see his ETA as coming up this year at all?
Yeah, that's the primary issue with Battenfield. I actually passed him in a DC in a draft and hold 50-team draft and hold league. I'm sorry, 15-team 50 player draft and hold, where I thought I'd be getting him in everything. I kind of just realized, like, you know what? I mean, the soonest he shows up this year is probably September. So he's someone that you're thinking about for 2024. I'm sorry, excuse me, 2023. If you're in a dynasty league, you got to be targeting him. I mean, he looks incredible, especially through his first 2 or 3 runs through the minors. But yes, you're right. It's been low minors. He'll definitely start in AAA. Indians don't. Guardians. The Guardians. They don't have a ton of pitching depth, so it is conceivable that he shows up sooner than later, like maybe in the summer. But I'm not going to hang my hat on that. It's possible that we never see him this year at all. It's entirely possible. So I'm not trying to get him too many places, but he is quite exciting to me. Patrick Sandoval. I think the biggest blind spot with projection systems is really knowing when to credit or discredit pitchers for their contact quality skills. And there are certain types of pitchers who excel, and that's primarily based on the pitches they throw and the locations they throw them, based on just kind of like the models and the zone analysis that I've done are the sinker guys and the low in the zone changeup guys. That's Luis Castillo, that's Patrick Sandoval, that's Lance McCullers, that's Framber Valdez. These guys who are getting tons of ground balls. Really, it kind of goes back to that old adage about targeting guys who are high ground ball guys. I don't think that's the only way to succeed, but the guys who are the sinker changeup combo guys end up performing significantly better than average in terms of managing that contact quality. And if a projection system just looks at Patrick Sandoval and regresses him toward the mean based on a fairly small sample of batted ball outcomes, like 80 innings worth or whatever in last year, then I think it's going to be underestimating that ability. That is probably already, a locked-in skill. And that's something that, again, my pitch tool could reveal is, these changeups and these sinkers that are similar to his are all good at managing contact. So it's just one of those things where, like, you're providing that external validation of what you're seeing and believing it also, as opposed to maybe leaning too much into regressing to the mean, which I think, again, is something that the projection systems have the hardest time with in terms of the contact quality element, especially because of how volatile pitching can be.
Great stuff. On to ATC undervalued players. And on the show here, we list out a couple players that looks like ATC deems as a bargain, and we question whether we agree with that or not. So starting with Jacob deGrom, who is listed as a bargain here. He is a $34 pitcher according to ATC, and that's just with a 142 inning projection. I mean, you understand that if he's a 200 pitcher, this guy is close to a $50 player, which is insane. Mike Podhorzer, who took a lot of risk in last night's labor draft. He took Jacob deGrom in the second round and had absolutely no problem doing it. I don't think we have to argue here whether he's good enough or not. I think the question is more about the innings and whether we want to take the risk on the innings. Let's go to Ruvain first, because this is an injury type guy. What are your best estimates on deGrom, and is the 142 ATC innings projection, does that sound right to you, or is it too high or low?
I think it sounds a little bit low because he's in a walk year for his contract. He's going to put it all out there. The Mets are not going to hold him back that much. He did mention that the last time he did an MRI, he felt pain because of the position that he had to be in for the MRI, and it made it worse. So whether that's true or not, you take that for whatever that's worth. He is 34. He's turning 34 this year, but he only has, talking about mileage before, he only has 1,200 innings on his arm. So that's not crazy. I don't think 140 is out of the realm of possibility. I don't think 150 is out of the realm of possibility. And if they're contending, he's the type of bulldog pitcher that you want on your roster that will pitch through a little bit just because he wants to help the team. And also, again, it's contract year. I think he's going to push himself a little bit more.
Alex, how do you approach these injury types? I mean, certainly if we had a guarantee that he would throw 180 innings, he should go 1-1 in drafts. What kind of haircut do you need to roster this kind of binary risk? And how do you approach these kinds of injured players where who knows how many innings they're going to have?
I think his floor is so spectacularly high, I think. Or just maybe not his floor, but his per inning value is so spectacularly high that, I think I saw from my numbers that he could throw like 110 or 120 innings as a third round pitcher and break even. I think he could very easily hit that. For injury guys, I mean, I'm obviously following the news. The last thing that I saw, and try not to read too much into people freaking out about it, because I think there's a lot of people who are very sour about the prospect of taking DeGrom, but he missed the whole latter half of last year basically, but he was doing bullpens in September and he was already ramping up to 98. So that was during kind of like his rehabilitation kind of part of his recovery, and it's going to be 6, 7, 8 months later possibly when he starts pitching, not pitching again, but when he starts seeing MLB action. I think it's incredibly possible that he pitches the entire year. I think there are a lot of people who are justifiably is the word I was looking for, justifiably nervous about it. But the fact that he was, the fact that he can already throw the ball harder than anyone else in bullpens as he's kind of rehabilitating is really impressive. And it's something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind that I think it's possible that he kind of shocks all of us. But I'm not going to even bank on that. I could just draft him at his current value, and all I need out of him is, like you said, like 120 or 140 innings, and he'd be well worth it at that point. So he's definitely in my game plan. He's maybe one of the only early round pitchers that is interesting to me, despite the risk, because he's so high value on a per inning basis.
So if he's available early third round, is this an Alex Chamberlain pickup?
Yeah. And if I didn't take a pitcher in the first two, which I almost certainly won't, so yeah, I think it depends on the hitters that are still on the board, because that's also kind of like Starling Marte territory. A little bit of who else is going right around there? There's a couple of nice we were talking about the 1A starters, and there's a lot of nice 1A hitters in the beginning of the third round, the end of the second round too. So I think it would really depend on what my structure at that point looks like. But yeah, he's absolutely in the conversation if he's still on the board in the early third.
Okay, let's talk about Clayton Kershaw. It's a similar boat, although in many ways a lot more risky, because he didn't really finish the season all that well, and he doesn't currently have a team, and I'm a little bit puzzled why the Dodgers didn't give him a qualifying offer, didn't sign him. Does that make you nervous for Clayton Kershaw? And he's going in the 13th round. Is that a gamble? Certainly, I mean, a 13th round player is less of a gamble in some ways than a third round player. Do you think Kershaw at his 13th round ADP is worth it? ATC has him for 123 innings.
And I think that's roughly about how many innings I need him to pitch to break even, according to my numbers also. So I'm feeling pretty solid about him. Again, he's he's SP 54 right now. I mean, he's very, very, very low on the starting pitcher list right now, and his ADP might not necessarily be low, but again, in terms of opportunity cost, I mean, he has to be one of the better values. I think. I've thought about this a little bit, and the qualifying offer thing is weird, and I think that teams maybe didn't do it because of the pending CBA conversation, because the White Sox didn't offer a qualifying offer to Carlos Rodon, which I thought was really weird, because basically they had this guy, they wanted to be their ace. They waited 7 or 8 years for him to be an ace. He became an ace, and will almost certainly make more money in free agency. Yet they did not offer him a qualifying offer in order to get that draft pick compensation. So I was like, that is incredibly stupid. But there's got to be a reason why the teams weren't doing this, and I think it might be because of the CBA stuff. So anyway, I'm not going to read too deeply into that. He's going to find a team. It'll be interesting to see where he lands. I would love for him to be back in LA. I just like the idea of him retiring as a Dodger. But the short answer is that he is very much in my crosshairs in whatever round that is. I think it's like the 15th round or something where he's still available. I mean, he's going to be a great SP4 for a lot of teams, even if he only throws 120 innings.
You agree, Ruvain? Is he a good pick in the 14th round?
I have some concern for him. Besides not getting the qualified offer picked up, he's 34 also. He's actually 3 months older than DeGrom, but he has 2,400 innings on his arm. That's just regular season. That's not postseason. He still could be elite because even when he was pitching last year before he got injured, he still was elite. But I think I'm more comfortable picking DeGrom because you get more value per inning, like you said, Alex. You get more value per inning there, and there's less risk just because he has less wear and tear on the arm. We don't know exactly 100% what's going on with him at this point, whether the Dodgers are trying to save money, whether they wanted to try to maybe lock him up and they didn't want to have to deal with the qualifying offer issue. So I'm more concerned about Kershaw than I am about DeGrom.
Yeah, I think I think that's fair to frame it that way. I also think that the options at the juncture where Kershaw's available are much less reliable than maybe some of the options at the top of the draft. And maybe that's not true, but I think once you're getting to that deep in the draft, there are guys who are genuinely bad who are going to be drafted. And I think having Kershaw on my team and giving me 120 very good innings, almost regardless, I'm not very concerned about the talent part of it. But if he gets injured, he gets injured. I'm going to be targeting him in shallower leagues, certainly because it's easier to replace someone like that if they get injured. But I do think there's a lot of pitchers in that juncture of the draft where they're not appealing to me whatsoever. So I think it's all relative. I guess is what I'm trying to say here.
All right, next one, and continuing with the injury comebacks or injury question marks, Mike Clevenger of the Padres. They traded to get this guy. ATC shows a bargain. ATC shows him at 121 innings pitched, 14th round. So it's in the range of Kershaw. Alex, are you concerned about his health? And between Kershaw versus Clevenger, who are you more interested in?
I'm more interested in Kershaw. I like Clevenger a lot, obviously before his injury. I think pitchers are coming back, and maybe this is anecdotal, but they seem to be coming back better and better from TJ surgery. I think something like thoracic outlet syndrome is much more of a death knell than Tommy John is these days. I think a pitcher can have Tommy John surgery, come back, and possibly pitch to the same level that he did before. It's just that it's just not guaranteed. And Clevenger is fairly affordable in drafts. He's not as low as I'd like him to be. He hasn't really been on my radar. Every time I have the opportunity to select him in a draft, there's just always better options. So I've never really had to make that decision. I think in an auction, I would definitely be considering him more because there's more opportunity for me to grab him at a price that I think is more representative of what he might give me. I'm a little concerned that the strikeouts might cave, or it might be a slow kind of ramp up from being off for 12, 16 months or whatever. So I'm a little cautious about it. I thought he'd be. I thought the community would be maybe a little more bearish on him, but they're not quite as bearish as I thought they'd be.
Ruvain, are you at all interested in Mike Clevenger? You're the health guy.
No, I actually prefer Kershaw than Clevenger here. Clevenger, he had Tommy John back in November of 2020, and as of September last year, we haven't heard anything since. He was on track for his rehab. But the Padres don't have such a great track record when dealing with this type of injury, rehab, that type of thing. Just look at Chris Paddock, look at Nelson Lamet. Nelson Met, they figured it out, and he became a reliever. But Clevenger only threw 41 innings in 2020. He didn't throw innings last year. He's post Tommy John. Could you expect more than 120 innings from him? At his ADP, you're going to get that value if you're going to get 120 innings out of him. The Padres list him as the number 4 starter right now, but they have a lot of flux in that starting rotation right now. A lot of pitchers there don't project to pitch that many innings. So he may be part of the plan. He may not just pitch that many innings. And if he's not going to pitch that many innings where you're getting him, I would definitely prefer Kershaw than Clevenger.
Yeah, I didn't say my opinions on both these pitchers yet, but I'm actually out on both of them. I don't prefer either of them. I do not want to take these kinds of risks with the innings. I understand Kershaw is going to give you good production, although he's not as good as he used to be. You might get a high 3s ERA this year. It's possible. I don't know why the Dodgers didn't offer him that, but I have a feeling they'll sign him again. But no, I'm not interested in this type of risk. I think that you need a little bit more of a discount than even this is going to take these guys. You don't have to win a league with these guys, but you could lose a league if you have guys that are going to be your number 4 pitcher and they're out. I like winning leagues on volume. I like winning leagues on less risk, and I generally don't like taking the risk at this level with my starters. I want guys to really solidify and give me those innings and those ratios, and I don't love taking these risks. DeGrom is very different, though, because DeGrom's level is so above everybody else, and I'm more optimistic about his health for some reason than these guys. And it's funny how Kershaw is really not that much older than DeGrom. Everyone thinks of Kershaw as the old man. But DeGrom is actually getting up there in age also. It's just that he found success later in life than the others.
Do you think you being a Mets fan makes you a little biased behind that? Because, that does play into our minds, even though we try to disconnect from the teams we love to pick the players that we love, but, it's kind of hard.
It doesn't make me more biased about DeGrom, but I have more awareness about DeGrom because I see him more regularly, and we get the bigger feel for him. So I don't think it's a bias. I think it's more awareness, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Let's talk about Charlie Morton. Charlie Morton is a tried and true vet. I think he has mechanics that remind me of Roy Halladay. And using your pitcher comp tool, Alex, Garrett Cole comes up, John Gray comes up, some decent strikeout people. He's 38 years old, but I kind of think he's a guy that can give you innings, and 162 is doable. And what a tough dude. I mean, he pitched after he broke that leg. He kept pitching on it. The guy is just bulletproof, and bulletproof means a lot. He has $25 upside. I think it's literally just an innings thing, and according to ATC interprojectional standard deviation, only a 2.3. Projections really agree on this guy. And he's got a great whip. His whip 1.16 projected. He had a 1.04 whip last year. To me, this is a really interesting value. He's going in the 7th round. I can see myself taking him somewhere around there. I prefer him not be my number 2. But if I'm going the 1A rule, I don't mind him being a high 3, going 1A, number 3 type starter. How are you dealing with Charlie Morton this year, Alex?
You pretty much nailed it. I mean, he's a 1A. I mean, he's not, maybe not a true 1A, but he's very close. I mean, he's got the strikeouts. He's got very tidy ratios. I mean, aside from just a few bad innings in the shortened season, I mean, he's been one of the best pitchers in baseball for the last probably half decade. He broke out in old age. I mean, this is who he is at this point. I'm less concerned about skills and kind of maybe not skills erosion, but maybe stuff erosion, because his stuff was probably already maybe in a lesser place to begin with at 33 when he broke out. Obviously, he did a lot of training. I know that he kind of recouped a lot of velocity, and that's been really crucial to his late career breakout. But I think those are the kinds of things that he will be able to cling to maybe a little bit longer than someone his age. I don't think he's going to give us 185 or 194 innings again like he did in 2019 and 2021, but even if he only gave me 150 innings of a 3.5 ERA or whatever, 1.1 whip, 27% strikeout rate, something like that is kind of like what I'm thinking about. Yeah, I love that at SP3, and I've been drafting as an SP3 for the better part of the last half decade because folks have been either reluctant to buy the breakout, or then after, if they accepted that the breakout was real, are like, oh, okay, so he's old now, so now it's an age discount. I'm more than happy to take the age discount, and I think there's kind of like the modern landscape of pitching. I'm sorry, not pitching coaching, but just like the way that they're developing pitchers and keeping pitchers healthy and creating skills, away from the field, like these driveline kinds of organizations and stuff. Guys like Verlander and Scherzer and Morton are going to be pitching possibly into their 40s and still being fairly good at what they do. So anyway, that's a very long-winded way of saying that I'm excited about Morton as my SP3. I've gotten him a couple of times as my SP3, so it's the perfect spot for me because I think he offers you the upside and the volume that you want from someone in that spot.
Ruvain, how does he compare to another Braves pitcher, Max Fried, who's a slight bargain according to ATC? He's not a big swinging strike guy, but he did have a nice 26% strikeout rate last year. But of course, Fried, his best aspect is his high ground ball rate. He's got a career 50 to 55% ground ball rate in every year, and his walk rate is on the low side. So, are you interested in Fried? How does he compare to the value per spot that you're getting with Morton?
I like Fried a lot better, not only because he gave me his autograph a couple of years ago when he was not even anybody, but I'm very comfortable. He's thrown 165 innings twice so far. Last two full seasons of ERA 2.25, 3.05, and whips both years of 1.09. So even though he doesn't get you a lot of strikeouts because he does have that crazy ground ball rate, he's an ERA and a whip stabilizer, and he's a perfect 2A3 if you wanted to say something like that. His ADP is around 72 right now. I much more prefer him over Morton, but I'm okay with Morton also. I just prefer Fried more. I actually had some news on Morton. Morton said last week that he's mostly caught up to where he would be normally at spring training, which means that he is fully healthy. So the projections that you say, whatever you say for Charlie Morton, it should be based on a healthy Charlie Morton and that he's fully healed. So that if that helps anybody, great, but I still think Max Fried is a little bit better. He's younger. He's, I think, 12 years younger than him. But Charlie Morton can have an quote-unquote Adam Wainwright type season because he's done this a couple of years now. A couple of years ago, he wanted to retire. And I think if he wouldn't have gotten injured and he won the World Series, I think he may have retired after last season. But because he didn't, I think he's going to pitch more, and I think he's going to be just as well good as he was the last couple of years.
Yeah, and the lockout actually helps him because could delay could let the injury heal even more, and also if there's any kind of innings limit for him because he's older or whatever, less of an issue because it's less of a season, right? Anybody with an innings cap or somebody who might be limited for any reason, either because he's old or young, right? Anybody who just a young rookie who hasn't thrown a lot in the majors, it could help them. That's interesting. I like Fried a lot. Even though Fried does not get you the strikeouts, I think it's more important in roster construction, especially in a draft, to take a guy with a dependable whip because you can always find strikeouts. You can always throw a 2-star pitcher if you've built up your whip and ERA. So I really like Fried. He's much easier to build a nice roster around than most. You agree with that, Alex?
It depends on what your roster looks like up to that point, but I suppose so. I mean, again, he's heavily reliant on his contact management, and he's very good at it. So that is a bona fide skill of his.
You're the Kyle Hendricks guy, right?
I'm the Kyle Hendricks guy. Yeah. Fried has great command. I mean, there's a reason why he's able to run those low ERAs. I don't think he's a 2.25 ERA. I don't think he's necessarily a 3.04 ERA. The ERA estimators are relevant for a reason, and they have him. They significantly overshoot his actual ERA. I do think that the projections are about the same, but if you put the projections for Fried and Morton side by side, I mean Morton is gonna be the better value even with possibly 20 less innings. But I think I'm indifferent. I mean they're both targets of mine, so it's always depending on the context of everything coming before it. They're both targets for me. And I think just to be clear, the inverse of that is I go through my drafts before they start and kind of like cross off guys that I know I'm not targeting at all, kind of thing. Guys who, if they fall a certain amount in ADP or price or whatever, and then there's guys who I just like, kind of regardless, or I'll go above and beyond their AAV or their ADP, and Fried and Morton are kind of in that vicinity for me.
All right, next player, Michael Kopech. He had 103 strikeouts in just 69 innings. If he were to pitch 160 innings, just 160 as a starter, that pace would give him almost 240 strikeouts. Well, we know that you can't just scale up numbers, but it looks like a lot of potential there. Michael Kopech seems like a nice bargain on a very high upside pitcher here. And by the way, if you are playing in those leagues that have SP or RP slots where you don't just have pick any pitcher, he qualifies in both. So, are you interested in Kopech, Alex?
Not really. Not
Okay.
really, because I think his leash on a per start basis is going to be very short. I think he's going to be doing a lot of Blake Snellian kind of starts where he's maybe going for if he starts, and I'm not even sure he's going to be a starter next year or at least start the year in the rotation. But he's going to be. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of 4 and 5 inning starts, never going 6. I would be surprised if he does. And I could be wrong. But I'm just not seeing a lot of volume, and I'm not loving that the role is not guaranteed yet. Maybe things are changing. Maybe I've missed some news, but the last I heard was that he quote unquote has to fight for a rotation spot. So, if they're making decisions based on talent, he will enter the rotation and he will be good. But he's not playing into my plans right now.
Well, if he doesn't start games and he comes in as a bulk starter, he probably will win more games than if he was a starter. And if he ends up being more of a reliever, those ratios will be even better. So he could be interesting. Ruvain, you agree?
I think he's more valuable as a middle reliever, as a bulk type inning guy after the opener, only because he also has a history of wildness. In the minors, he was walking a lot of people. As a reliever, he was averaging three walks per 9 innings. As a starter, actually, when he started, he actually started 8 games so far in his career. He had a 1.26 walk per 9 innings, which is different. But I think that his problem is going to be his control, and the fact that he threw 2 miles per hour faster that as a reliever than as a starter shows why those strikeouts were up. So I'm a little bit nervous about those strikeouts, materializing if he remains as a starter. But if he does the bulk inning thing, then I'm 100% for him.
Before we go on to our next player, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Now, unintentionally so far, I've been razzing a little bit on the Twins. Now, the Twins, they signed Dylan Bundy to anchor their starting rotation, which sounds a little crazy, but that's because Kenta Maeda is probably going to miss the entire year because of Tommy John surgery. Dylan Bundy has started a total of 133 games in his major league career. The other 4 listed starters on the Twins, according to Roster Resource, Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, Randy Domnack, and Lewis Thorpe. My question today is, how many combined games have those full 4 starters started in their entire major league career combined?
Alex?
Oh man, 23 maybe.
Well, I'm not going to price is right you and say 24, but I'll go with 32.
The answer is actually 50. Randy Domnack started 21 games, Bailey Ober 20, Lewis Thorpe 4, and the next guy we're going to talk about, Joe Ryan, is 5. Now, the reason why we're going to talk about Joe Ryan is because during those 5 starts, his K per 9 was 10. He had 1.69 walks per 9 innings. He had a 53.9 fly ball rate with only a home run to fly ball rate of 11, which actually may be an issue. But how much stock do we put into this pitcher being drafted where he is with only 5 career starts in the MLB?
Yeah, well, I mean, he had a .79 whip last year, which was amazing in those starts. Of course, it was very BABIP-aided, .197. I mean, anything below like a 260 is, interesting. That's a very low BABIP. He does not walk a lot of people. 5% walk rate, and it's true for his minors career. He had a 12% swinging strike rate, and in the minors it was closer to like 15%. So he's going to have a very solid K minus BB. Last year it was 25%. That's excellent. I think that you can't expect an ERA of under 4, especially with a lot of fly balls, and the homer to fly ball rate will regress. But, something a little bit over an ERA of 4 and pretty decent whip. I think you can expect something like around a 115 whip is not too bad. And I love those whip pitchers. And ATC is usually not high on rookie prospects. And ATC is pretty high on him, showing almost a $5 bargain. 15th round ADP, but worth a couple of rounds more than that. Joe Ryan looks very interesting from my standpoint for the value. Agreed, Alex?
Yeah, I have him as like possibly a top 30 arm on a per inning basis. Not in volume, because the volume's not necessarily locked in yet. Although I do think, based on what Royven said, is that that rotation's in shambles. So Joe Ryan could find a lot of innings, I think. But without the volume guarantees, I think on a per inning basis, he's probably a top 30 starter for me. Again, this is a pitch comps guy for me. I mean, a guy who I came in not really knowing anything about him. It's a bad fastball, although scouts, and maybe I'm just referring to Fangraphs, put a 60 grade on it. So I think scouts really like the fastball. Fastballs with similar shapes have not performed particularly well. So I'm kind of unsure about what to make of that. But plenty of pitchers have succeeded with bad fastballs, and his slider is excellent, and his changeup, which is not really like a big whiff pitch, echoes of Kyle Hendricks, Zach Davies, Aaron Nola. I mean, these are some of the best changeups in the league. So he definitely has two very good secondary pitches and possibly a good fastball. Whether or not he has a good fastball is probably going to be the difference between if he's giving up a lot of home runs or not. And I think it's valid to be concerned of the home run issue, and I think that would be born of the bad fastball issue. But the two secondaries and solid command are enough for me to be pretty excited about him. And the good part about that changeup is it's going to be kind of it's going to play the opposite role of that fastball. I mean, it's going to get a ton of weak contact if it's anything like the the Kyle Hendricks and Zach Davies and Aaron Nola changeups that it comps so closely to. He's going to have that weapon to suppress hard contact. It's just that the fastball will leave him vulnerable. But I think he could be like a mid to high 3 ERA guy with like you said, a solid K minus BB.
Is he a guy you're going to take because he's pitching in the AL Central? Does that play into it? Because he's going to be pitching against the Indians, they're not going to be that good. He's pitching against the Royals, so he's going to get a lot of good starts. If he wasn't taken right away last year, he was a waiver wire guy, and people were taking him and plugging him in for certain starts, especially in that division.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the ADP was a little bit higher, I would start making a decision based on that. But I think his ADP is low enough for me to be like, I'm just taking him for the talent and the prospect of him possibly throwing 140 innings or even more in that rotation. But it is a bad league, and it's possible division, and it's possible that division being so bad will make his fastball play up. I mean, maybe this is a perfect situation for him to be in with a bad fastball. Like, he couldn't really ask for anything better than to be in the AL Central, frankly.
Yep, agree. I think he's worth definitely taking a chance on at that price. Usually you have to pay for some of these talents. This is a pretty low price for him. Moving on to next pitcher, last one here for the day, John Means. John Means has shown some really good stuff. He's had some great games. His whips have been remarkable. A 1.03 whip last year, 0.98 whip the year before, 1.14. I love these whip pitchers. He's got a very low ATC inter SD, so projections largely agree on him. In terms of strikeouts, you're not getting that fantastic strikeout rate as others, but again, the whip really helps with other roster construction, always. It helps build up that base of ratios so that later in the year you can throw in an extra 2-star pitcher because you've built up that thing. Now, here's the interesting thing about him that I can't understand. They announced in Baltimore that, I can't remember exactly when they announced it. I think it was back in maybe November or December. I think December, they announced his that Baltimore was going to move the fences back, right? His ADP for the month of November was 204. I would think that for Means, the ADP would have gone up for him to a better ADP because, you say, oh, Mountcastle's going to lose home. Well, John Means should technically get a little bit better than he was before. And what happened to the ADP? It actually went down. His December ADP, 227. January ADP, 222. It's been holding there. February ADP, 220. So people are still getting a discount on John Means. And I don't see why. I think he's in the 15th round. He's a guy who can stabilize your. I guess it's the strikeouts. People love taking these strikeout pitchers, but I look at the walks. He's got a 4.5% walk rate last year. That's phenomenal. And now he's going to be able to limit some more homers. So I'm very interested in John Means, who your pitch tool, Alex, says has a comp to both Giolito and Scherzer. So what are your thoughts on John Means, the Baltimore Oriole?
Yeah, I like him. I like the park situation now more. With the whole left field expanding thing, he is one of the most fly ball oriented pitchers. And before we make a knee jerk reaction and assume that's a bad thing, he has if I'm thinking about this correctly, and I might have to look at the numbers, he has either the top 3 or the number 1 highest pop up rate. Pop-ups as in free outs. So he works up in the zone so often, and induces such weak contact at the top of the zone that he's going to run a low BABIP, and he's going to run into home runs. That's kind of what Justin Verlander did in 2019. In 2019, Justin Verlander started pumping fastballs up in the zone. I think his four-seamer gave up 25 home runs on its own. 25 homers, and he still had a 2.58 ERA. Now, I'm not going to say that John Means is Justin Verlander, but this up-in-the-zone approach with fastballs, getting tons of weak contact, getting more whiffs up in the zone, that's something that John Means can do now more effectively with the walls pushed out in left field. So I think you're not only going to see lower BABIPs, but you're going to see fewer home runs, and right, he's got solid control. I mean, he's not a bad pitcher, and I think there might be a bias against fly ball pitchers because of this kind of false kind of assumption that fly ball pitchers equals bad and ground ball pitchers equals good. And there's a certain point where the higher your fly ball rate, or the inverse is the lower your ground ball rate, the more pop-ups you're inducing, just kind of by virtue of how your batted ball distribution looks. So John Means is great. I like him a lot. I don't want to say great, but he's a good pitcher, especially at his ADP, and the fact that the new park and all of that hasn't really changed anything is kind of astonishing. I guess some of us we ingest news differently because people make knee-jerk reactions all the time, and the fact that this is not doing anything to his draft stock is very interesting to me.
I'm very surprised. Ruvain, do we get a third thumbs up from you?
Yes, you do. I like John Means a lot. I think he's actually like a Max Fried light. They're both lefties. Max Fried is a ground ball pitcher. And John Means is a pop-up fly ball pitcher. John Means' career fly ball rate is 48%. But look at that. But the ERA is not that high, and the WHIP is pretty good. And the fact that they're moving the fences back a little bit, that only helps him. The only question is how many innings he's going to pitch. Last year, he only pitched 146. He never pitched more than 155 innings before. But besides that, he is, to me, like a Max Fried light, and if you can get a discount on him, grab him.
All right, we'll do a couple of questions here. We have MS asks, and I guess let's do them more lightning style. I'll give this one to Ruvain first, actually. Another injured pitcher, or coming back from injury. Verlander seems to be comfortable betting on himself on contract incentives. How far does he need to fall for you to feel the same? So what's your thoughts on Verlander, Ruvain?
I am not touching Verlander, so he's got to fall very far. He hasn't pitched in a while. He's in uncharted territory, and having Tommy John surgery this late in his career, I am all out in Justin Verlander.
Agree, Alex, or no?
Yeah, he's just not been a target for me, and kind of the Clevenger issue. I'm cautious about the Tommy John situation. I'm even more cautious because he's old, and I understand that he's in uncharted territory himself by being this old and this effective, for the most part. But this is a lot of risk to be taking on at that juncture in the draft.
Kevin asks, how would you rank Joe Ryan, Mike Clevenger, Aaron Ashby, Casey Mize, and Drew Rasmussen for 2022? Or how about for Dynasty? We're not really Dynasty guys here, but a quick answer on a quick ranking, Alex?
Sorry, say the names again. It was
Joe
Ryan,
Ryan, Mike
Mize.
Clevenger, Aaron
Yeah.
Ashby, Casey Mize, Drew Rasmussen.
Pretty much in that order: Flip, Mize, and Rasmussen. Ashby is interesting. I'm not sold necessarily on the skills yet, and again, that's a pitch comp revelation for me. I think he is interesting. I know that the AAA skills or the AAA stats were they're pretty eye popping actually, but the pitches themselves don't comp overly well. There is some promise there. Clevenger has possibly a higher ceiling. It's just he's more of a risk. So I think those two are interchangeable. I just don't know if Ashby falls into innings this year in the rotation as much. Rasmussen's also an interesting arm, but was much better in relief than as a starter, and I think people see him as a starter where I don't think he's going to necessarily play up the way he did in relief, and Mize being the worst of the five just doesn't have much at all in the way of tools, despite his pedigree.
We'll do one more. Murad asks, question for you and your guests. What is your blind spot when drafting a team? I know you like to draft values, but how do you balance between values and high upside players? By the way, just to elaborate on the blind spot, I'm referring to your weakness or things you've never considered before but are coming around to it recently. As an example, I'm now open to picking a closer pretty high up this year, which I've never considered before. Thoughts, Alex, on a blind spot?
Oh God, I mean, my blind spot is typically just being too locked into a specific strategy, or locked into certain players at certain rounds. Because I do have my targets, and I do have guys that I like. I do have guys that I'm trying to avoid. Sometimes that list can become a little too narrow in some spots, and I think it ends up reverberating throughout your draft. So this year I've been trying to be a lot more flexible. Really just trying to force myself to not feel that bias of my targets, and still at most points just take the best player that's available, or the best player that's available for my current roster construction, and not try to force the issue of fit this target into this current roster and see how it works.
Ruvain, you have a blind spot?
Believe it or not, I think it's taking injury guys too early. I think I give injury guys people who are injured too much credit when they come back. I think they're going to get more value than I really think so. Last year, I think we had Nelson Lamet on all of our rosters. That screwed us over. We take these guys toward the middle to the end of the draft, and I'm a little nervous and hesitant about taking him. That's why I don't want anything with a whole bunch of different players coming back from injury. Some of them yes, some of them no, but I need to see proof before I can take him.
Yeah, blind spots are usually blind for me. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a blind spot I have is in pitching. I used to be really good at drafting the pitchers. I've studied quite a bit more on the hitting, and I think I do a better job now, and I haven't gotten into myself yet into the level of pitch detail like you have, Alex, or some others have, Nick Pollock, and they know the ins and outs of this slider's working, this changeup's great, and they're changing the pitch mix. I haven't really gotten deep into doing that, and that's definitely a blind spot that I have. And I'd say maybe prospects. I don't really know prospects, and that is one too. Ruvain, quick injury update. Go for it.
Okay, I got 3 players I'm going to throw out here. First of all, Matt Allen, who is a pitching prospect for the Mets. He had a second surgery on his right elbow last month. He is not expected to pitch this year. DJ LeMahieu said last week that he is fully healthy from October surgery for sports hernia, so he's good to go. And this is bad news. Josh Jung, who's a top Rangers prospect, is expected to be out 6 to 8 months after arthroscopic surgery to repair a torn left labrum that he injured in the weight room. This means that Kiner Falefa will see more time at third base for the Rangers.
Alex, been a really great show. Thanks so much for coming on. Before you go, can you just tell us where we can all find you, reach you, read you, and all things Alex Chamberlain?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's always a pleasure. I am on Twitter at Dolph Haldhagen. I'm not going to spell it. If you find me, you've earned it. I write sparingly at Fangraphs. I keep the pitch leaderboard. I also have my pitch comps tool. If you find me on Twitter, you'll find links to those as well. But, give you a little bit of homework. Come try to find me.
Sounds good. Ruvain?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I'll tweet out injury updates as they come, and they should be coming more frequently as the lockout hopefully comes to an end. I will also have a weekly in-season article with Rotobar discussing all these injuries and other injuries and next guy up.
Yep, Alex, we will post on our site here your Twitter handle as we do for most people. So
there we go.
You can look it up if you want the challenge, but you can also look at our site here. I'm Ariel Cohen. ATCNY is my Twitter handle, the shortest Twitter handle in all of fantasy baseball. I beat Sporer by a letter. You can read my stuff over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, and ATC projections are up there, as well as CBS Sportsline. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast each and every week. All right, once again, thanks so much, Alex Chamberlain, for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.